Well, good morning, everyone. If you will, please open your New Testaments to John 13. And while you're turning there, let me welcome all of you. Happy New Year to all of you. We have some visitors all the way from Kentucky, my new adopted favorite state. Well, not new. I've wanted that since I was 4. If you don't know that story, I'll tell you later. But we have some special guests from with us, as well as Robin's sister and brother-in-law, Kelly and Kevin, are here. And then especially, more important than them, is my nephew Joey and his new wife Jamila, or Jamela. I got it right the second time. So if you get a chance to welcome them as well. Thank you all for being here today. The elders have selected a theme for 2026 of service and growth. And so that's going to be a theme that we're going to be touching on pretty often in the coming year. We're beginning the year with a lesson on that theme today. And there's some changes that are going to be happening in the first part of this year, starting in February, that affect our work here together. And another reason for us to all take on a role of being servants to one another for that to succeed. Before we get over to John 13, and you don't have to turn there this morning, this passage in 1 John, the 4th chapter, and verse 19, where John wrote, "We love because he first loved us." So God loved us first. He, if I can speak pidgin Greek, he agaped us first. Agape means to seek the best for the person around you, the people around you. It's not primarily an emotional response. It's not like the philo love, the brotherly love. There's certainly an element of emotion in it. But for the most part, agape is a decision you make. It's a choice that you and I make to make ourselves servants of others. And in this text, it tells us that God is the one who served us first. He loved us first. He saw the needs that we had. He set out to do what was best for us, to provide for us what was the most needed thing. And he created us and everything that we have. And then we sinned. And now there was something that we needed that we couldn't do for ourselves. And so he again sent Jesus to serve us and to meet our needs in this most important way. And I think that it can be a little jarring for us to think of God as being a servant. We think of him in the context of, obviously, the creator of the universe, in all of his majesty and his glory and his honor and all of those adjectives that Ross read for us, that David called out in his prayer. And when we think of God in that way and picture him in that way, it's a little hard for us to picture him as a servant. But that's exactly what he is and who he is. He is the God who serves. And the only way I can know that is because that's what he revealed about himself. That's what he revealed about himself in his word. We love him and we serve him, but we do that because he served us first. And you're sitting there thinking, well, I don't know that verse really cuts it for me. I don't know that I'm ready to go all in on this idea of God being a servant. Well, we're going to be in a text that I gave you earlier that I think is the perfect illustration of that truth in John 13. So what I'm going to do this morning, and hopefully my voice will last through that, I'm going to read the entirety of this text in John 13, verses 1 through 17. So if you've got your Bibles open there, and you can just leave them open there, we're going to be there most of the time this morning. The other passages we'll have on the screen. It says, "It was just before the Passover festival. Jesus knew that the hour had come for him to leave this world and go to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. The evening meal was in progress, and the devil had already prompted Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot, to betray Jesus. Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power, and that he had come from God and was returning to God. So he got up from the meal, took off his outer clothing, and wrapped a towel around his waist. After that, he poured water into a basin and began to wash his disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that was wrapped around him. He came to Simon Peter, who said to him, "Lord, are you going to wash my feet?" Jesus replied, "You do not realize now what I'm doing, but later you will understand." "No," said Peter, "you shall never wash my feet." Jesus answered, "Unless I wash you, you have no part with me." "Then, Lord," Simon replied, "not just my feet, my hands and my head as well." Jesus answered, "Those who have had a bath need only to wash their feet. Their whole body is clean, and you are clean, though not every one of you." For he knew who was going to betray him, and that was why he said not everyone was clean. When he had finished washing their feet, he put on his clothes and returned to his place. "Do you understand what I have done for you?" he asked them. "You call me teacher and Lord, and rightly so, and for that is what I am. Now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also should wash one another's feet. I have set you an example that you should do as I have done for you. Very truly I tell you, no servant is greater than his master, nor is a messenger greater than the one who sent him. Now that you know these things, you will be blessed if you do them." What I want to look at this morning in this text is the example that Jesus sets for us of God serving man. And I know that this text is a familiar text for us. What I would like for you to do this morning is picture yourself there in that upper room, kind of in the back, in the corner, and you're just going to be observing what's going on here. And if you're doing that, what you're going to see is you'll see the 12 apostles there. Now, I believe that you'll see some other disciples there as well. I think there are more than just the 12 there in Jesus. But let's not focus on them. Let's look at the 12 apostles. And of course, you're going to see Jesus. And if you observe just those 13 men, the 12 apostles and Jesus, you're going to see kind of a strange thing. Because you're going to see 12 apostles who all desire to be Lord. None of them wants to be a servant. And you're going to see one Lord who is also going to be a servant. And I'll prove that assertion to you a little in just a few minutes here. Interestingly enough, in the text right there starting about verse 3, the author of this gospel tells us what was on Jesus' mind. Tells us what he was thinking as he's come to this Last Supper, to this final Passover, and what he's thinking about. And the first thing we read is that he knew that his hour had come to leave the world. That's a nice euphemism for saying he knew he was going to die. Listen, if you know a person who's about to die, they ought to be the target of our consolation, of our comfort, of our meeting their needs. It's not the time in that person's life where we would expect them to get up and serve us. Jesus also knew that all things had been given to him and been given into his hands by the Father. Listen, as we look at the life of Jesus, he's healed the sick, he's cast out demons, he's raised the dead. Some of these apostles that are here have heard the voice from heaven saying, "This is my beloved Son in whom I am well pleased. Listen to him." And he knows that he's about to be exalted, which is another reason why he shouldn't be getting up and stooping to serve these other 12 men. Jesus knew that he came from the Father. He knew, as the writer of this gospel said, that he was the Word that became flesh. He was the Word that was God and with God and was God and became flesh. He knew who he was. He knew he had come from the Father. And he knows that he was going to be returning to the Father. And that at that point, when he returned, he was going to be given a name that is above every name. Look at Philippians chapter 2, starting in verse 9. "Therefore God exalted him to the highest place and gave him the name that is above every name, that at the name of Jesus every knee should bow in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue acknowledge that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father." These are all things that Jesus knew. They're all things that were in his heart, that the author by inspiration has been able to tell us what Jesus was thinking on this particular occasion, what he knew to be the case. And all of them are reasons, good reasons, for Jesus to be the one here who's being served. And it's in that context that we read, "He arose from supper," in verses 4 and 5, "laid aside his outer garments, and taking a towel, tied it around his waist. Then he poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and to wipe them with a towel that was wrapped around him." He got up, and then he stooped to serve. And I will tell you that in this act of service that Jesus is manifesting his true greatness here. Jesus is not showing off. He's not putting on some sort of false humility. And so play acting a role that he wants his apostles to play. This act of washing their feet was not out of character with Jesus. Listen, if it were, then we'd probably find ourselves right alongside of Peter later on and saying, no, that's not going to happen. What we see here in John 13 is exactly who Jesus is. I want to go back to Philippians, the second chapter. I have among my Bibles, I have a one-man translation written by a guy whose last name is Phillips. And I use it as a reference. It's not my normal Bible, but he puts things in a way that helps get the understanding of it. And I like that sometimes. And this is how he wrote, or how he translated himself, verses 5 through 8 of Philippians 2. He said, "Let Christ himself be your example as to what your attitude should be. For he who had always been God by nature did not cling to his prerogatives as God's equal, but stripped himself of all privilege by consenting to be a slave by nature and being born as a mortal man. And having become man, he humbled himself by living a life of utter obedience, even to the extent of dying. And the death he died was the death of a common criminal," which your translations say, by dying on a cross. I think that you can see from that, especially at the beginning, that this attitude of being a servant, of having a servant's heart, of seeking to serve, existed in the Word before the incarnation ever happened, before he ever took flesh. And in fact, I would suggest to you that it's that characteristic of being a servant that led to the incarnation. Becoming flesh did not make Jesus a servant. It was his very nature before he took on flesh. And then, as Paul says here, then becoming flesh, he even humbled himself even further to serve even more. It's not right, it's not fair to speak about Jesus as making himself a servant for 33 years. That he gave that up and now he's a servant. And, we can all go through the, put in our time, 33 years, or even condensing it even later and saying for 3 years. Look what he did for 3 years. What Jesus is doing here is the natural outgrowth of who he really is at heart. We're seeing a tiny picture of what God has always been. Being a servant and serving is a trait, it's an attribute of deity. Again, he's not just acting a part here. He has a servant's heart. We're very familiar with the fact that it says God is love. God is agape. God is a servant at heart. So we have to understand that God's greatness is not measured in raw power. And I think that that's our default answer most of the time. We see God, we see his majesty and his greatness and his creativity. Paul said in Romans, the first chapter in verse 20, for since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood by what was made, so that people are without excuse. And we just, listen, you cannot look out and see even Kitsap County, let alone our solar system and the universe, and not be struck with God's greatness. But that's not the main message of God's word. Greatness there we go, clearly seen. Okay, I forgot that I was going to emphasize that. God's greatness and greatness in God's kingdom is measured in service. Jesus taught this a couple of times. Matthew chapter 18, more than 2, but I'll give you 2. Matthew 18, verses 3 and 4, and he said, truly I tell you, unless you change and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Therefore, whoever takes the lowly position of this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. And then a little bit later, in Matthew 20, verses 25 through 28, Jesus called them together and said, you know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. Not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant. And whoever wants to be first must be your slave, just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. So here in Jesus' teaching of his disciples, he not only demonstrated this idea of being a servant using a small child, he also specifically taught them about that. And I've got to tell you that teaching didn't resonate with the apostles. They didn't care for that very much. That must be applying to somebody else. They weren't into becoming servants. And it's because of that persistent misunderstanding that they had about how God's kingdom works, that it is so different, that we then read that Jesus rose to serve. And so he taught them. Luke chapter 9 and verse 46. This is proof that I was telling you earlier that we have 12 lords in this upper room. An argument started among the disciples as to which of them would be the greatest. Have you ever stopped and thought about what that looked like? Have you tried to picture that? Because I haven't been able to come up with it yet. Oh, I don't know about you, but I'm greater than him. In fact, really, when I think about it, I'm greater than all of you. No, you're not. I'm greater. I'm the one. He called me first. You can just hear that. And so here's this argument of started among them, which of them should be the greatest? Then you have this great scene where James and John, the sons of Zebedee, come to Jesus and they say, Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask. What do you want me to do for you? He asked. They replied, let one of us sit at your right hand and the other at your left hand in your glory. Well, at least they left it up to Jesus to choose which one would be his right-hand man and which one would be his left-hand man. But listen, what's in their hearts is, we just want to be higher than these 10 guys. We want to be greater than them. Now, the catcher here is in Luke chapter 22. And the reason I'm giving you this one, because it's the same statement that you read that we read earlier in Luke chapter 9. So you can see how persistent this is. What you're reading in Luke 22:24 is happening in that upper room during the Passover. And it says, a dispute also arose among them as to which of them was considered to be greatest. I don't know if they're trying to arrange the seating arrangements, Well, I'm better than you, I'm greater than you. I don't know. But it's because that's still going on. You're observing that. Listen, when you're observing that, you're seeing these guys argue with each other, who's greatest. And then you see something strange. You see Jesus get up, take off his outer garment, wrap a towel around his waist, fill a basin with water, and come and begin to wash his disciples' feet. That's why Jesus did what's pictured there. So let me ask you, what do you think about that? What's going on in their minds? I don't have this in my notes, but it just popped into my head. When I was younger, we'd have Thanksgiving dinner or some holiday dinner at our house. My grandmother would be there, my grandfather. I don't know if this really happened, but I can picture it happening, is because there's a football game on and I don't want to be bothered. And my mom would say, Danny, will you take out the garbage? Okay, I'll do it in a little bit. And the next thing I know is I see my grandmother hobbling out of the kitchen carrying the garbage. How do you feel if you're me then? Are you ashamed? I think sometimes if we were in Peter's place here, we would probably react the same way. We can't imagine that the Son of God is about to wash my feet. And so he protests at first, and I'll give you the passage. He came to Simon Peter. I don't know if he came to Simon Peter first or not. I'm not sure about that. But listen, if somebody's coming towards you, having taken off their clothes, they got a towel tied around their waist with a basin of water, and they're kneeling down in front of you, doesn't it seem pretty obvious that you shouldn't have to ask this question? Lord, are you going to wash my feet? And Jesus hit it spot on the head there in verse 7. He says, you don't understand now what I'm doing, but you will later. And I'll just give you a hint here. He did get it later. Here's 1 Peter 5, verse 5. In the same way, Peter wrote, you who are younger, submit yourselves to your elders. All of you, clothe yourselves with humility. Don't you know when he said, clothe yourselves with humility, he saw Jesus tying a towel around his waist to serve? Clothe yourselves with humility toward one another, because God opposes the proud and shows favor to the humble. So Peter did eventually get it. But not yet. Because then, after Jesus said, you won't understand what I'm doing, but you will later, Peter absolutely refuses to allow Jesus to wash his feet. Here's what he said in verse 8. No, said Peter, you shall never wash my feet. Now, the English translation of this doesn't really give it its due. Here's the literal. You'll never wash my feet, never. Here's our man Peter again. Humble enough to not want Jesus to wash his feet, but proud enough to dictate to him what he's going to do or not do. Listen, Peter's problem here is the same as one that we have, and that's that we do not see the God-invested greatness in service. I'll tell you probably, and this is my opinion, but I think Peter was probably embarrassed by being served. Have you ever been embarrassed by somebody wanting to serve you to the point of not allowing them to serve you? I think if we're honest, probably all of us would say, yeah, I've been there. Because leaders don't act like this. Leaders are the ones who are served. Leaders aren't the ones who are kneeling at my feet and washing them. And because he had that view, and because every one of those apostles there had the view, they were a leader, they were not a servant, and that's the way we think. That's the way we think. Isaiah chapter 55, verses 8 and 9, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts." The way we think doesn't matter. We have to think like God thinks. We have to use his ways. Because in God's economy, this is exactly how leaders work. They take off their coats and they put on a towel and they wash feet. I want you to pay special attention to what Jesus' response was here to Peter saying, "You'll never wash my feet, never." Jesus said, "Unless I wash you, you have no part with me." I want you to hear the serious tone in Jesus' words there. If you don't let me serve you, then you can't be a part of me. If you don't accept this, you don't accept me. There is one Lord, and it is a serving Lord, and if we're going to be his disciples, we're going to be like him, like our master. And so God's way has to be our way too. Now this is free, here's a side note. That's true on both sides of this service equation. We have to be willing to serve others, which isn't our biggest problem. Our bigger problem is we also have to be willing to let people serve us. I see this in Jesus too. In Luke chapter 7, 37 and 38, a woman in that town who lived a sinful life learned that Jesus was eating at the Pharisee's house. So she came there with an alabaster jar of perfume. As she stood behind him at his feet, she began to wet his feet with her tears. Then she wiped them with her hair, kissed them, and poured perfume on them. I have to tell you, I have always admired Jesus for letting her serve him. That had to be really uncomfortable. It had been devastatingly uncomfortable for me to allow a woman to serve me like that. So again, I'll ask you this question. Does Jesus' actions in the realm of service, not only this one that I just showed you where he was being served, but more in keeping with our lesson of his realm of service to bowing down, stooping down and washing his disciples' feet, does that devalue God in your eyes? To think of him as a servant? Listen, I know you know that washing feet in the house was a job that was reserved for who? The lowest servant in the house. Remember, I told you before we have 12 lords. if one of them got up to wash feet, what would he be saying? Well, I'm not the greatest in their economy. They're not going to give up their case for being the greatest. They're arguing about who's greatest. If I get up, I'm giving up my argument. Listen, I know all of us are happy to serve, especially in big ways. 1 John chapter 3, verse 16. This is how we know what love is. Jesus Christ laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for our brothers and sisters. And we would say, we think, I'd be willing to die for my brothers and sisters. John's statement here is called an a maiore ad minus argument. In Latin, it means from the greater to the lesser. And basically, it's saying, if I've got a container here that holds 64 ounces of water, I know it'll hold 32. If it'll hold 64, I know it'll hold 32. And if you're willing to die for someone, if you're willing to have your life taken from you in service to someone, do you think you might be willing to wash their feet? Or to help them in some other lesser way than actually dying for them? Listen, Jesus did both. He laid down his life and he washed their feet. And I will tell you that the sheer magnitude of Jesus' service here in John 13 and to us in general is just immeasurable. I can't find a greatness scale that will fit him. And again, as his disciples were to follow in his footsteps and to serve one another in any and every way that we can. The Old Testament has portrayed the Messiah prophetically as a servant. Isaiah 42, 1 through 4. Here is my servant whom I behold, my chosen one in whom I delight. I'll put my spirit on him, and he will bring justice to the nations. He will not shout out or cry out or raise his voice in the streets. A bruised reed he will not break. A smoldering wick he will not snuff out. In faithfulness he will bring forth justice and will not falter or be discouraged till he establishes justice on earth, and his teaching the islands will put their hope. Listen, Jesus is such a servant that if you're a broken reed, he's not going to say, well, you're not going to be useful or anything, and throw you away, or you just barely got a little bit of spark there, and he puts you out. He's going to do whatever he can to help. Isaiah 52, verses 13 and 14, see my servant will act wisely. He will be raised and lifted up and highly exalted. So that's the after effect of the servant heart. But here's what preceded it. Just as there were many who were appalled at him, his appearance was so disfigured beyond that of any human being, and his form marred beyond human likeness. The beating that Jesus took before he was crucified, you would look at him and you wouldn't even be able to tell he was a human. And of course, that text is followed by Isaiah 53 that we read this morning and we read often when we think about what Jesus did for us. And Jesus certainly portrayed himself as a servant. We see it here in our text. What I want you to understand is that there was no law or demand external to God that forced him to do that. He was under no obligation. There was no one dictating to the word that you have to become flesh and you have to suffer and die for these people. No one is ordering him to serve in that way. What he did is in perfect harmony, as we've said many times this morning, with his character. Listen, if he'd acted any other way, he would be a hypocrite, because he would be acting in a way that's not him. The God we serve serves. And he served us first, as we started off with this morning. And he's calling on you and I to serve as well. Not only to serve him, but to serve each other, to serve those who are in the world. Even the lost. Listen, go back to that upper room. Look at the apostles whose feet he's washing. One of them in just a few hours is going to deny that he even knows him. There's another one that's even before that that's going to go to the priests and the Sadducees and the council and betray him to his death. Jesus washed his feet. I'll leave you with this passage in John 13:15. I have set you an example that you should do as I have done for you. And in fact, the last verse that we read, now that you know these things, you'll be blessed if you do them. I was really glad that I scheduled this lesson for this first Sunday of 2026 as we kind of kick off this theme of service and growth. Let's see what we can do with that this year. Let's become a congregation of servants, not only to each other, but to those in our acquaintance who need Jesus Christ. As we talked about in our First Peter class this morning, live a life so good that they will have nothing evil to say about you. And even draw them to become Christians. So if we can serve you this morning in your relationship with Christ, either in becoming a child of God, or if you would want to become a part of his family, or as a part of his family, come back. We'd love to sing with you in heaven. And if we can help you make that a part and a reality in your life this morning, please won't you come forward while we stand and sing.